My name is Elizabeth Nearing. I'm the literary manager here, and I'm thrilled to welcome Rabbi Michael Farbman of the Temple Emanuel in Orange, Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us. There's something about the concentration of emotion that happens after such grief that brings all of these deep-seated feelings about faith and about how to pass on the legacy of the person who's passed away. And one of the things that's so extraordinary, Poppy means so much to everybody, every one of the cousins, right? In a different way to each of them, I think. And I think each of them have different thoughts on how to pass on whatever it is that he's left to them. And a part of that, of course, is the question of how to be a Jew, right? Which is such a big question, and what that means. So do you have any insight on sort of the definition of what it is maybe to be an American Jew, to pass that on?
How much time do we have again? I think that there is, okay, let me go back. The name of the play, Bad Jews, and the way they refer to each other seems to suggest that there are bad Jews and there are good Jews. And I've heard so many times over my life, and especially over the course of my rabbinate, people say to me, "Rabbi, I'm a really good Jew." And I've heard people say, "Rabbi, I'm a bad Jew." And frankly, neither description means anything, or it certainly doesn't mean what people think it means. There's no such thing as a good Jew or a bad Jew. There are perceptions. One of the things that I think the play brings out so viscerally, and I spoke to a lot of people after I saw the play, and I realized that people were having visceral reactions to it. I heard from people who could not wait to get away the minute the play was over. Like literally, somebody said to me, we couldn't even talk to anybody. My wife and I just walked out of the room.
But they waited until the end.
Yes, correct, right. So that's the good thing. They did not walk out halfway through the play. Although somebody said to me that from the minute Daphne came out of the bathroom and attacked Jonah, right, that's when they wanted to leave. And their experience didn't actually change for them. So it's an intense play and exploration. One of the things that I think struck me was how, for all of them, or at least the way it's presented for us, is that they all dwell on the superfluous, not so much shallow, but the shtick. What matters is the shtick. For Liam, what matters about high is not the high, and not even the story at least that's what we see on stage. What matters is that he's going to use it as a romantic gesture. That he's going to fight so hard, and he's going to leave no prisoners. And poor Jonah nobody leaves prisoners in this play, and he gets the short end of all of this. But he's going to go to war, and he doesn't need it. He just needs it for what it symbolizes for him, the connection. And so ultimately, it's about the shtick. And Daphne, sadly, doesn't fare much better. She certainly knows more, but she brings all of the Mishigas into this, and she builds it up in such an intense way. And in the end, she says, I don't want it. Although, actually, I don't know about you, I didn't believe her. I didn't believe her the first time around, and I certainly didn't believe her today. I think she did want it. Yeah. And I certainly believe Jonah when he said he didn't want somebody else to have it. Yeah. And so, good Jews and bad Jews, the connection with the loss, and the connection with loss of this incredibly powerful character in their family narrative, Poppy, and what it means, there is the underlying stuff there. They're all mourning his loss. And the fact that his stories of whatever kind of a character, the only moment any of them are intensely happy is when they are laughing on the floor here, remembering how Poppy ran to the bathroom. Right? And it's the only moment when there's three of them together. which is ultimately, I think, where you hit that Shiva dynamic and that moment of having the family together and having to experience it together. And it's all about human experience. You know, every time we ask the question, wherever you are, whatever group of people you ask, what does it mean to be a good Jew? And does it include, or is it superseded by, being a good person? And I've asked this question of groups of teenagers, I've asked this question of groups of adults, of young adults, and it's a fascinating dynamic. But most of us agree that we really want to be good human beings first. It's undeniable to me that Liam is a very Jewish character. And he carries it. That's the way he presents it. His fascination with culture and another culture, and his utmost dedication to it, and the way he approaches all this is all it's all very Jewish. But at the same time, the way the dynamic between him and Daphne plays out takes it into a different dimension. So the fact that all of these characters are not, that we're not presented with a likable character who presents a good Jew or a bad Jew, I think that's a challenge to us. And I mentioned this to you when we spoke before, that it really asks us some very, very tough questions, and it puts us on the spot, right? And that makes for a good theater. I know that when I walked away from seeing the play for the first time, all of these questions and all of these things, and look, I do this for a living, and even I walked away and I'm pondering, what does it really mean? And how do we really, what's the language that we use? And what does it appear like? And if you care so much about Judaism, is it really necessary to be obnoxious? And all of this stuff. And I carry this, so that's great theater. It pushes you to think. And I walked away feeling, well, I couldn't really do anything like this in the synagogue. I could never really be that obnoxious with the questions but no, that's not what it's about. But theater can do that, and theater should do that. So I've had conversations with people who said, no, they really didn't enjoy the play, that it was too this and too that. And I said, I actually enjoyed it, because as a play, it's theater. It pushes me well beyond my comfort zone and my comfort level, and into addressing what those questions are.
Maybe.
All right, there we go. Yes.
Is it?
It is, yeah.
Great, awesome.
This way you can actually ask them questions and not just listen to
Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh, no.
That was bound to happen. That's all right.
It's okay. We have paper towels somewhere in the building, so I think they'll be here momentarily.
You're filming this, right? You know, Purim was only last week, and it's all about excitement and entertainment, right?
See a lot of nodding. That's good. So just back to the idea of likability, and the idea that and you know, there are people who have walked away not wanting to talk about this play. I mean, it provokes a lot of questions. And this idea, is there some kind of, do we have an obligation to create a likable character if we're representing, you know, different cultures? Should there be somebody likable? That idea is it? Thank you so much.
There we go. Keep asking. All right. There we go. I clean up also. All right.
Anyway, so in terms of the characters in this play, you say, you know, there's no likable character, right? There's perhaps moments of empathy, but there's not. You don't say, oh, I want to hang out with that person, right? And that even without that likability, there's questions they raise, right? And how does that provoke? Like you say, that's not something you could potentially do in synagogue, right? You couldn't present that. So is there, in storytelling, I mean, is there some kind of obligation, you think, to likability?
That's an excellent question, and obviously I love it. I'm sitting here as if I'm a theater critic of some sort, or if I know what I'm talking about. But I think that's really a question to the audience and to critics. Let me explain what I meant. In trying to process the play after I first saw it, I think the fact that the Jewish character, or intensely Jewish character, was not all that appealing. She did an incredible job, by the way. It wasn't that. a spectacular performance, and the energy, all of them did. And so when you look at that, and I spend my life encouraging people to be Jewish and to do Jewish and to engage with Judaism. So we talked, my wife and I, when we saw the play, we said, well, it raises some of the questions that have been lately heard over our dinner table. And our son is 14 and a half, and so some of these questions come up. Should we have him see the play? And we initially said, well, maybe not, because the intensely Jewish character was so negative that, you know, wouldn't it be great if there was at least some redeeming features, you know? And so I think, but I think it goes deeper than that. And the deeper than that is, how do we perceive art? Not that it matters, but there were today Jews in the audience, and there were probably non-Jews in the audience. And so, do we see it differently? I suspect yes, we do. For Jews, we kind of feel this goes right to our kishkis, because this is talking about us, and it's really pointing the finger at all of our questions and challenges and issues that we struggle with, and we look at our family histories, and we look at the cousins and the broken up relationship, God knows what else. For non-Jews, this is an exploration of cultural, especially if you're a minority. It's like, you know, when I was talking to somebody about this the other day, that when my Big Fat Greek wedding came out, right? The cinemas were full of Jews who were sitting there laughing their heads off at every single piece that was happening on the screen, because yeah, it's not Jewish, but it is so relatable and it is so close, and we so relate to all the mishigas happening there. So everybody puts it through themselves. And the question is then, in the audience, is there a difference in how we perceive it? And I think what you're asking is there an obligation to actually create positive characters? As a theater, do you want to alienate your public who walk away and feel, yikes, I feel like me and my tradition has just been taken to cleaners? So, in a way, I think that I would have liked a positive character so that I could juxtapose them. But I don't think that there is a positive character, or there's one needed in here. Yeah. You know, when I first saw the play, I kept waiting for somebody else to walk through this door, maybe a parent. Right? I waited for somebody else to relieve these people of all that tension.
Yeah. And there's something about the pain you're talking about in the beginning, too, right? That they're all in the midst of grieving. That there is pain in the room before the argument begins, that there is something in there already. And the fact that a parent doesn't come in sort of allows the tension to build to the point that it does. And that perhaps we're not seeing all these people in their best light, but you know, when people are in such deep pain, it's so often they aren't in their best light, you know, necessarily.
Absolutely. And so, in a way, chances are they're not actually that bad. You get the condensed version of themselves. You get the condensed like and dislike that exists there, that occasionally explodes around the Pesach table or something like this, or a Thanksgiving table that every family has. But now, the pain of the loss comes in, and also the way this loss is treated. Yeah. And obviously, Daphne cannot forgive Liam for not being there when she thinks he should have been, and Liam cannot forgive Daphne for being Daphne, or he cannot forgive Diana for being Daphne, I think, to begin with. So there's that, and they certainly, the lashing out, I think, and the heightened drama of their relationships comes to fore. And the loss clearly plays a part in this. But the questions that the playwright is asking us, and I think he deliberately leaves just one generation in here, because he's trying to talk about the questions of the generation. One of the best comments, and I've recognized, first time I watched the play, I said to myself, I recognize every single character in there. and I recognize, if not the characters themselves, although some I have met and had relationships with, but I've recognized also the type and this concept. I'm sure many of you have heard about this and read about this. It's spreading like wildfire, especially in Israel. Young people are getting tattoos of their grandparents' numbers onto their hands. And what does that mean? It's a struggle for some kind of an identity and connection, but you can't really right the wrong with another wrong. And why, what does that do? And actually the question is, you end the play on Jonah's tattoo, and is he the only redeeming feature in this? I don't know. I have an issue with that also. But it's either the characters themselves or the issues they bring to the conversation that are very recognizable. And they even talk about this. We are now the generation, and we need to. Donna talks about this, where she says she acknowledges the generation, which is actually very important. I can tell you, every time people lose their parents, one of the biggest realizations is that I am now the first generation. This is now me, and it really hits them. So this is something they're dealing with. These are the questions of the generation. One of the best comments I heard was from one of my congregants who said, "I recognized every single character, and it was me at different stages of my life." And I thought that was also a wonderful, wonderful way to. And of course, there's 4 sons of the Seder table, so all of this plays out.
There's something about the searching for filling the void of the past generation, and the fact that it is only one generation on stage, that they're trying to remember Poppy in different ways. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the different ways in which we see these people try and move on in this. And I mean, I'm not sure anybody really succeeds over the course of the play in filling whatever void that is that Poppy's left, but how they're each sort of striving for some kind of filler. Sometimes I'm searching for the word, but.
So I think that there's an additional question to that, because there are 2 things at play. One is they just lost their grandfather, right? And you don't have to be Jewish or not Jewish to experience that. There's a loss. And with that loss, you have to figure out how you're going to carry this. But for them, even though Liam kind of tends to see himself as if he's distancing himself, but he's not. For all of them, Poppy is clearly this powerful Jewish figure in their life. Right? So what does that mean? And what do they do with it? Liam uses a Jewish symbol, very potent Jewish symbol, but he only takes the romantic gesture that his grandfather did. So he knows he was going to tell all about the history of the Holocaust, but all that matters is the romantic shtick that he wants to replicate. Right? So, but he wants to remember his grandfather, and he wants to connect with his grandfather, because he just lost his grandfather.
And he says to Jonah, we lost Poppy too.
Absolutely.
Not just,
Absolutely. But I think what he says to Jonah is about, Daphne, she's usurping everything, and she's sucking the air out of the room.
Usurping the grief even.
Absolutely. Of course. Well, and we've all experienced that, I'm sure, too. And we've seen that. So for him, he channels that. Jonah clearly is the quiet one, and he takes on a very physical kind of a mark. He misleads us, he fools us, right? Because all through the play, he says, leave me out of it, leave me out of it. It's nothing to do with me. Although eventually he says, I don't want to go out of the family. So he realizes something that Liam is so obsessed with himself, he's so self-centered, and by the way, that's not necessarily a Jewish trait, but he is so self-centered that for him, it only matters what he can get out of this. And Jonah, when pushed, he understands that this is something that is bigger than all of them. That there is some kind of a connection. That it's not just about a personal way of connecting with the grandfather, but it's also about preserving something within the family, which which Liam, he is so culturally diverse and advanced in his multiculturalism that he says, all of this stuff you're holding on to is not real, diluted, and it wasn't true to begin with. So, he just went through, I very often talk to people, and I'm a Reform rabbi, so people say, no, Rabbi, the Orthodox I don't go to should be Orthodox. And we have these conversations about it, how it's all about this search for authenticity. And Liam, unbeknown to him, he displays some of that. He says, all of what you're doing, just because you're a woman and this and that, and for your 21st century sensibilities, you had to dilute it anyway. But then he throws, and it wasn't true to begin with. So he's not quite sure what he thinks of all of this, but he knows that she's fake.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just doesn't like her, and therefore everything she does is fake.
And the word authenticity is so great, and also the authenticity of grief, right? There's this like, who grieves the most, whose grief is right, who's wrong. This idea of right, wrong, and good and bad really don't exist. Like what you're saying with the idea of labeling what it is to be a good Jew or a bad Jew, that they're not really there.
And the high, who gets to inherit this? As if, let's face it, high is just a symbol. It's a symbol of a story. You don't need to physically wear that high around your neck to connect to the grandfather's story, to remember Papi, and maybe more importantly, to try and figure out what does it stand for? What does this high stand for? It's a symbol for everyone. When I said it's shtick, it goes both ways. It's a symbol. High is a symbol. And Liam is absolutely correct in saying it's just a piece of gold.
Yeah.
And for me, he says, that's my grandfather's piece of gold. And it's my family's history. But for his grandfather, it was something else. And the real question is, does the next generation have an obligation to try and keep what really mattered to their grandparents? Or is it okay if they just observe, if they just keep the memento? Jewish tradition has actually struggled with this. And there's a very beautiful midrash that Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, this incredible mystic, whenever the community was in danger, he would go into the forest, to the spot that only he knew. He would start a sacred fire that only he knew how, and he would say the words of a special prayer that only he knew. And then in the next generation, his successor would go and find the spot, and he would start the fire, but he would not know the words of the prayer that was all. And then the next generation would go and find the spot, and he didn't know how to make that fire, and he didn't know the words of the prayer, and it was enough. And every generation it was enough. Until we get to our generation where we have no idea where the spot is and how to make the fire or what the words of the prayer were, but the fact that we're telling the story has to be enough to save us from danger. So where is that line? And this is where good and bad Jews comes into play. Where is that line? And that's the question probably to you more than it is to me, because you don't want all the easy answers now, do you?
I don't know if there are easy answers to like that and how things pass on, because there's a natural evolution of faith and of tradition and of all of these things. And I think it's, in a way so important that the older generation doesn't come into the room, into the argument, right? Because it's how do they pass this on, whether it's, on Jonah's arm or with the religious value of the high or the story or whatever that piece of it is that they pass on. And that's something that I think, regardless of the symbol, with or without the high, this question of how you pass on the symbols.
So let me ask you a question about the audiences, because I have only been to 2 shows. What is the generation that comes in to see the play?
Predominantly closer to puppies.
Okay.
I would say. And over the course of the run, younger and younger.
Okay. So the generation that is portrayed on the stage are the millennials.
Yeah.
Right? And because they are left to figure this out by themselves, we're given the impression that it's a great tool, right?
Yeah.
And they are only able to figure it out as much as they can figure it out. Mm-hmm. Now, the millennials are not the first generation to be so obsessed with themselves, but they definitely are.
Sure, and a part of that is being young too.
Absolutely, right.
It's a part of
That's
young.
what I'm saying. So they're not the first. So a lot of it and everything is about them.
Yeah.
The question is, all of these questions that you're raising here on stage in a very sort of cutting edge way, with the way it's played out and the language and the visceral, the closeness with the audience, that's very, very powerful. Are you taking that conversation to the millennials as well?
Yeah.
And because, you know, if the older generation is not in the room in this conversation, then you're certainly triggering the thinking, right? You say, okay, what is the thing? Maybe, you know, Pesach is what, a little less than a month, so at the Seder table, I'm kind of wondering how many of you are going to bring this up and talk to your grandchildren about this and find the right way. But is there a way to really engage the millennials in this conversation as an audience, and what would their response be as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. There's a greater question also about audiences in theaters, right? That they are, in general, predominantly older and bringing in younger people. And it's been interesting over the course of the run, we've had more and more younger people coming in, whether that, you know, people under 40, people under 30, like gradually coming in. I think people are a little gun shy of bringing in high school kids, and for the most part, so we don't have like a student matinee for this one, which we often do.
I want to see the face of the teacher whose students go home and say, guess what words I heard at the play today?
Although they likely have heard them before. I think now would probably be a good time to open up to questions from the house. Emily Breeze, who's our artistic resident, has a microphone, so if you would raise your hand nice and high if you have a question. Down in the front row.
It just occurred to me that could this happen for another culture, and would it have had the same impact?
So just to repeat in case everyone, would this have happened with another culture, and would it have had the same impact?
What's this? What is this?
This argument on stage, perhaps? This whole play?
This whole mourning, and particularly the article that they were fighting over.
So the fighting over the high, if that's something
But
that...
couldn't this happen in another culture?
That's an excellent question. I think that we all like to believe that we're somehow special, right? And there are certain ways in which the dynamic plays out that are clearly Jewish. I don't think that that's exclusively Jewish. I think that it can play in any culture, and I think that this whole conversation about half Jewish and half Delaware is a great American. This was a very humorous and very clever part. It's a great American question, and there are cultures and there are neighborhoods where people struggle with exactly the same kind of a question. What does it mean to be Irish? What does it mean if being Irish is boiled down to St. Paddy's Day and everybody getting drunk and wearing green, right? What does that mean? That's a caricature of what we are, and is that what we want to be? But also, as a community that experiences the results of melting pot. These days, people don't like to talk about melting pot, they talk about tossed salad. They say everybody brings their ingredient and their flavor, and everybody can retain their flavor. It's actually a wonderfully beautiful thing there. But we come through at least a century, if not more, of the melting pot and its idea. And so the question is, what does that mean? And popular culture explores it sometimes. What does it mean to be half Guatemalan and quarter Jewish and something else? And Daphne asks the right question. It's just that she does it in such an obnoxious way that all we concentrate on is how obnoxious she is. But she asks some very good questions, as does Liam, by the way. He's one of his final monologues is so deep, and so he's just that by now he had so discredited himself in our eyes that we don't want to listen to what he says. He says some very, very important things. So yeah, I think it's any culture. This was a specific Jewish take on this, but it can happen.
And there's something I think about being so specific that taps into a universal idea of, like, you have melody, you have this outsider coming into this culture and to this experience of mourning and having that and trying to say, oh no, but it's okay that I'm an outsider, figuring out how to fit into this place, which is something that I think does happen in multiple places.
And while the microphone is traveling, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm glad I stayed. I actually wanted to run into the parking lot after this because I was struck by how misogynistic it was. And that really bothered me a lot. I thought, why is this play focusing on the negative? I mean, not that Liam looked so great, but clearly Daphne looked much worse. And I felt that the message, which was very powerful and important, and by the way, I thought when you said, was there any good character? Yes, Melody looked great compared to anybody here. But why did the playwright choose to make the female character so incredibly unappealing? So it did strike me as very misogynistic, and I was really bothered by that because I couldn't get into what I thought were the more important issues because I was so offended. So that's...
Well, I think that's a question to you, actually, because I certainly don't feel like I can answer on behalf of the playwright.
Sure, I certainly can't answer on behalf of the playwright either, but I think the question of how these ideas are packaged, right? It's in such a heated moment, in such a moment of anger and defense and trying to prove oneself. And there's something that I would say that we haven't talked about yet, is that Daphne is also the only female cousin, right? And that she's fighting for something that's usually passed down to men. And so she is in a way trying to prove that and fight harder and fight, and there's something in there, I think. And I think also as audiences, we're often not used to seeing women like Daphne on stage arguing the way that she does. It's not something that I think is here very often.
Well, today is March the 8th, International Women's Day. So, we can remember the suffragists and we can remember some of the things that it took and sometimes continues to take to ensure that women actually have a role to play in the society. And a lot of that, you're right, came with a fight and came with pushing boundaries that go far beyond anything that most of us are comfortable with. But that's part of the struggle. I think that, first of all, thank you very much for staying and asking the question. I think ultimately, and this is a question about what makes good theater, for this conversation to really be a conversation about identity with its depth, those are not good characters to discuss it, right? There is plenty of painful and thoughtful and hopefully appealing characters that can participate in this conversation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they are definitely characters to make us have a visceral reaction to issues and to really push us. And here's the interesting thing. Nobody that I spoke to who had seen the play had said, right? Yeah. Not a single person said, People either said, wow, that was really intense. Or they said, oh my God, this was impossible. Yeah. But everybody was asking questions and everybody is pondering, and that makes for good theater, I guess.
Yeah, and I think sometimes packaged in the way that it is provokes those questions more aggressively than somebody who's easy to agree with. You question because it's not easy to just say, oh, I like them, yeah, that's right, they're right. But because in a way, everybody on stage is at some point right and at some point wrong, even Melody, even Jonah. And I think that there's something also.
What do you mean, even Melody? She's good.
I don't know, that moment where she says it was in somebody's mouth. Oh, it's just such a. And that's what you got from that story, is that it was in somebody's mouth.
No, but you see, that is a beautiful punctuation mark in that sentence, and I think. Actually, for me, this is a very powerful moment, because what it is showing to us and holding mirror to us when we reduce anything and everything to a shtick. And as a shtick, as a romantic gesture, all of this goes only that far. And and while she acted exactly the way and she was excited and she accepted, by reducing this was in somebody's mouth.
Yeah.
That's how, for me at least, I think that it's important that we figure out the real stuff and that we steer clear of. I think it's okay. I mean, it has a place in our lives,
Sure.
in our society. But what matters is there are so many deeper things that we can concentrate our energies on.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just briefly, I am slightly able to not speak for the playwright, but just relay something that he said previously. I'm Emily Breeze. I'm, as Elizabeth said, the artistic resident, and I assisted Oliver Butler on the play. And something that he said when he's talked about Daphne as a character is that he finds her just as unlikable as Liam. He sees them as equally unlikable, which whether or not that comes across is totally up for debate. But for him personally, he feels that Daphne and Liam are on equal par in terms of unlikability. So just throw that out there.
Well, there's something also in the lobby of the original production. They had an opportunity for the audience to vote between like Liam and Daphne. I'm curious. So I'm curious, just for my curiosity, if can I see a show of hands? If you had to vote one way or the other, how many of you would raise your hand for Liam? Just between the two, who wins? Who do you like? There's a lot. It's a very complicated thing. Simplify it as best you can. If you had to choose.
Likeable, not likeable.
There's a lot of. I think I got myself in the doghouse.
That's it. You're on your own here.
Well, there's a lot. You know, there's a lot of different questions on it. Like if you were to pick a side in the argument between the two of them, which is it? Not necessarily who wins, but who would it be, right? And the answer is, I think almost for most people I've talked to about the play is that it's not so simple as to pick one or the other. They both have good ideas. They both argue. They're both vicious. They both, there's some equality in that.
They're actually related. You can tell that. No, but I really mean this because they are both highly intelligent, somewhat restless. They can't let go of an argument. Both can be brilliantly ruthless and they know the soft spots. And actually, you know how they are exactly the same. My take would be from the way they treat Jonah.
Yeah.
And they play Jonah it's just such an equal way that they are. You can tell they're related.
They even use the same word. I love that they both say quash.
Yeah.
So can you just quash that for me?
Kind of
so.
And he tries, and he really tries.
He does. All right, next question. Yeah, go ahead.
What troubled me most about this play is that given the issues the playwright wanted to discuss, there was no depth at all. What it was a caricature of a discussion. Neither argument was presented with any depth. And a stranger coming in from another planet would have no conception of what it is they were talking about. And that troubled me enormously because it shows little respect for the issue in a way.
That's actually a very interesting take. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. My understanding is that when the play was written, it was written as a sort of as a small thing, right? It was not that anybody sets out to write an insignificant play, but it was not really seen as a big thing. And it ended up far bigger, and it plays all around. I spoke to my friends in London who have seen the play, like this week. And so this is playing all around the world and quite intensely. I think that as a conversation among millennials, this puts the issue on the table, and it does so in a very crass way. I think that, and this was the question about the audience, I think for an older audience, we don't need the risque language to open up for us that those issues exist and that they're important. We actually say, okay, we know that. Now give us a little more. Now give us the deeper conversation. But I think the play is written in a way of actually putting the issue on the table for the younger generation and saying, hey guys, this is happening. How are we treating all of this? And what are we doing with all this tradition? And so in that respect, I think that's a very good point.
I think there's also something about posing the question, right, and not the answers in the play, right? That as a piece of theater, it's posing questions, not answering them. We have time for maybe one or two final questions.
Hi. I think her comment about, oh, it was in someone's mouth was, to me, almost one of the climaxes of the play. And completely, I think the playwright, and I don't know if this is true, chose a winner in that comment. In other words, she really has not a clue what it means. And I am just very curious if Liam ends up marrying her. And if he does, then how could he? I mean, that remark just like, I gasped. So I don't know if there's a question there, but I would love to know if there's any inside information about whether, in some ways, the playwright was making a decision there.
I mean, in a way, yes, right? Yes and no. Like, of course, there's some decision being made dramaturgically there about what happens with the battle, right? Because there's a world in which Melody comes in and says, no, give it to Daphne. I understand, and then all of a sudden she becomes the savior of the play, right? And that's a question that I believe came up in the process. That there's you don't want to have an exploration of these three people, call the play Bad Jews, and then have a young woman come in and save the day, and that's a.
I thought if she was a really good person, she wouldn't have taken it.
And it's.
But you know what? Let's be fair to Melody. When a young man proposes to a young woman and she kind of likes that idea, then and it's clear to her that not only is he proposing, that apparently he's doing so with a lot of thought put into this. Now she doesn't understand. She doesn't connect to the symbol at all. But the fact that he sincerely is proposing to her with this, and that he went to a certain length, and that it's actually cute and somewhat unusual, that it's not with the ring, that it's with something else, she responds to this in a very natural way. She says, and she accepts this. As far as people marrying or not marrying and making mistakes, welcome to real life. What's the current divorce rate that we have, and all the complications that it brings, and then if you bring into this the questions of religion and ethnicity and culture, you further complicate this, or it works, and it works beautifully. I see a lot of this every day, and so I did write the play, so I don't know. I think you may be right, that certainly it's clear from the way Liam leaves the room that a seed may have been planted. And to be honest with you, not that I disliked him that much, but proposing to your girlfriend at your grandfather's shiva, you are bound to have some kind of a reaction that will all of a sudden, because he thinks he's doing the good thing. He thinks he's at the height of this emotional moment, and he's going to do something that will make him feel better and almost offset the pain of the loss. Well, all it takes is one comment. And perhaps you're right, to forever paint this for him in a very different color. But what's interesting is, and I think Daphne is being terrible about it, but even if it doesn't work out with Melody, Liam may not necessarily seek another partner who will really be kind of a challenging equal for him. So if he doesn't marry Melody, maybe, but we don't really know exactly what he will do with his life.
Part two.
I felt at the beginning of the play that
the whole stage was set by a dynamic that has nothing to do with Jewishness at all. And that was the underlying animosity or jealousy between Liam and Daphne, or the jealousy of Daphne and the two boys. There was a status, there was a money issue, there was a jealousy that was set so it made it impossible for them then to come to any kind of positive resolution on something that was important to them all, because they were already, especially on Daphne's part, already so jealous of her cousins that she could not come to an objective resolution.
They clearly have issues in their family, and you're right. It transcends ethnicity or religion or anything like that. I think that it is very clear, though, and remarkable in how they mirror each other, that both with Daphne and for Liam, part of that grandstanding is about Jewish experiences. That it's not just about an issue, although it's definitely about class, and while she begrudges the boys, she tries to prod Jonah, but she certainly begrudges this to Liam. The way Liam handles it is completely off color. I mean, it's just, and so this is, they spent their entire life growing up like this, and so you're absolutely right. And those kind of issues are there. What is specifically Jewish about this is this whole concept of an attitude to our tradition, and I think that reflects the problem, or it pivots it and puts it into very different light. It's very hard for me to see this in terms of a general issue, because obviously I look at this as a Jew, and there you go. Now I said as a Jew. So not quite the same context as they use it, but looking at this as a Jew and seeing the conflict, the Jewish conflict, and the attitude to what actually happens within the family, that clearly is a very important and not meaningful, but I get a visceral reaction, I think, to this. But you're right, the questions of class and attitude. By the way, Liam could have gotten into the hotel room with his girlfriend just as easily, but no, his thing is going to be about talking about how cheap Daphne is, and he goes for that even when he talks about the grandmothers.
Yeah.
Oh, so there's.
And she's not even in the room when he goes for it too.
Right, and it's definitely there, and I'm sure that's definitely not a Jewish question, but the way the playwright framed it for us made it feel like a real Jewish perception. All the looking at each other, looking down at each other, Jewishly speaking.
We're about out of time, so I think we should wrap up. And I think there's that. Just circling back to the framing and the first comment you said about where they are at the beginning of this play, and where it's framed in a Jewish context, and also about grief, right? That these things are all coming up to the surface, and there's an element of finding some sort of thing to fill the space. Poppy left, and all of those arguments that they're having about that, and whatever way who grieves more, who deserves it, right? And this very human need, this very to fill that space when somebody's gone, too. I think.
And I think they make reference to the suffering. They say, well, I certainly cannot claim to have had that kind of an intensity of suffering, but I want to connect. And I think the question is, the further away we are removed from, and we've never had it this good, right? As a Jewish community in this country, things are incredibly wonderful, and not without challenges. I'm not trying to be the rosé, but when you compare it to some of the experiences that the previous generations had, please God, nobody will ever have the kind of experience. Those two boys, Daphne, maybe she goes joins the army, but it looks like it's a shtick also. But they will never really have that kind of an intensity of experience that will somehow define their Jewishness and their connection to their people in a way that it was defined for Poppy, who lost his entire family. And so the real question is, how do you go? So Liam talks about dilution. Well, that's his take, but what's our take? How are we going to maintain the connection, even though the intensity of experiences is no longer there, and that's a good thing. That's a challenge. How do you maintain that connection in good times? And the connections that were clearly, for this generation, formed by the stories of people who experienced incredibly bad times. That's a challenge.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.